Okay, good afternoon, everyone. We'll call this meeting to order. I'll ask if there's any disclosure of pecuniary interest. If at some point throughout the meeting you find that you do, please declare it at that time. We have one deputation today from Ontario Parks, an M&R update regarding the master plan and maintenance. We have Mr. Greg Forbes and Megan Pomeroy. So welcome.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Turn it over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for inviting us. So I guess what we're going to start off with today, we're going to talk about a few topics, but I think the big one is going over the park management planning process. And Meg's here. Meg Pomeroy is our zone planner. She's going to be basically giving a Parks 101 for planning presentation. I know there's a few new councillors around the table here, so I guess without further ado, we'll start into that, Meg.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody, for having us here. As Greg said, some of this material, it's a bit of an overview, and it provides kind of a framework within which we'll make decisions as we move forward. And then there's a little bit about the specific stages of the planning process that we're at right now and what the next steps are. Greg and I are fairly informal. We like questions, so if you want to chit-chat as we go through, we'll do that. If we need to keep moving along, that's fine. I don't know if there's a big time constraint to the time here.
It's usually 10 minutes, but if there's questions in between and things, we'll
Okay.
yeah.
Perfect. I'm a little bit new to the municipal processes, so just keep me going if I need to. And
It's important, so
yeah,
we're good.
We'll carry on. Okay. So this is a little overview of the presentation that I'll give. I'll talk a little bit about Ontario Parks and Wasaga Beach Provincial Park, and then the legislation within which we operate and that guides all of our activities. A little bit about beachfront maintenance and the management plan update, park boundary review, and a little bit of information about how we're going to do consultation on both the management plan and the park boundary update. So Greg and I will kind of tag off a little bit, and if I forgot something, he will jump in.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I'm going to trying all my tools here. There it is, look at that. Okay, Ontario Parks. We are a branch of the Ministry of the Environment, Conservation and Parks. This is new for us. For 125 years, we were part of the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry. Recently, we were moved over into a new ministry. So that happened after the most recent election, so we've been transitioning since that time, but we are now part of the MECP. So we still work closely with the Midhurst District of MNRF and other MNRF branches and sections, but we're in our new ministry home and we're kind of learning all the ropes and the connections in there. It's terrific to have Ontario Parks and Parks generally in the title of the ministry. We think that it adds a little bit of a consequence, and it's a really positive thing. So the branch of Ontario Parks, we operate and manage 340 provincial parks. And with this transition, we've also acquired the operation of 295 conservation reserves, which used to be part of the MNRF. Now it's part of our shop. So it's nearly 10 million hectares of land across the entire province. The map's a little fuzzy, but you can see we span from the Hudson Bay coast all the way down. It's not very visible, but we have our most southern park on Pelee Island, which is at the same latitude as Northern California. So we've got a wide range of areas, properties, landscapes, different kind of habitats, different kind of uses, different kind of impacts that we operate all within the same branch and under the same piece of legislation. So about 30% of the provincial parks are what we call operational, so they'll have staff and facilities. They often charge fees. We get lots of visitation. We had over 10 million last year, which is a pretty good number. We're very proud of that. We operate with 260 permanent staff, 600 seasonal staff, and quite a number of students. We're one of the largest hiring bodies that hire students in the government. It's a great first job. I recommend it. That's how I started. Anybody who has a kid out there, come to talk to Greg. You can see we have a range of different amenities. We have a lot of trails. We have various kinds of overnight accommodation, looking at everything from campsites to the wilderness and backcountry. We also fairly recently have moved into roofed accommodations. So again, there's kind of a range within that. We're looking at tents and cabins, yurts, that sort of thing. They're scattered throughout the provincial park system. Yeah, you're on the roofed accommodation committee.
No, not on that one.
Oh, okay.
No.
My mistake.
Yeah.
So then the last point is one that we've talked about before, but it's coming to bear in an interesting way. So we operate under an entrepreneurial business model. We have an average cost recovery of over 90%. So that means the money that comes into our gates, the parking passes that we sell, the firewood that we sell, the canoes we rent, or the campsites, all of that money goes into a pot, and that's what we use to operate our parks. So it's different than many other parts of the government, and that has been an interesting transition to our new ministry home because it's just a little bit unusual. If there are any questions, let me know, but I'll just carry on. So we are part of the southwest zone of Ontario Parks. If you draw a line from about Midland down to Burlington, and then everything down to Windsor and Pelee Island, that's the southwest zone of Ontario Parks. We have about 50 provincial parks, a range of operating and non-operating parks, around 28,000 hectares. We acquired 3 conservation reserves as part of this transition. The Discovery program is what we now call our educational programs. You may have been familiar with the term natural heritage education. So that's what the new name is, Discovery. So we have 17 programs within the zone. A few notable parks for various reasons. The Rondeau Provincial Park 125th anniversary is this year, which is a big celebration. And then we have a lot of beaches at Wasaga Beach, as you know, but we also have Pinery and Long Point, and a range of different ones, even Little Wee Port Bruce on Lake Erie. Yeah. It's about 300 meters long. So there's also a range of different activities and uses that happen within our parks in the southwest zone. We have a farm at Bronte Creek. There are pigs and turkeys and animals, and it's an opportunity to do education around different farming and settling activities. We have a golf course in Turkey Point Provincial Park. I think it's 9 holes that the park staff operate. We also have 2 large swimming pools. The one at Bronte Creek is 2.5 acres. And so we have lifeguards that work there and a range of different programs and activities there. So it's just interesting to think about the range of activities, the range of kind of landscapes that we operate under, all within the same piece of legislation with the same kind of objectives. So there's a lot of room to play within the framework within which we operate. So a little bit about Wasaga Beach Provincial Park, which I know many of you are already familiar with. We're 1,844 hectares, so it's just over 4,500 acres. It was first regulated in 1959. It's changed shape a couple of times since then, but that was the first iteration. It was regulated by an order in council, and it's now regulated under the Provincial Parks and Conservation Reserves Act. We had 1.69 million visitors in 2017. Generally speaking, we get over 1 million visitors every year, although, as you know, it's a weather-dependent kind of thing, so last year was a pretty good sunny year. There are 3 full-time staff, of which Greg is one, and about 80 seasonal staff.
Yeah, and that 80 number manages Craig Leith Provincial Park as well. That's got about 15 staff, so 80 encompasses all that. And then Meg's going to speak a little bit lower about the non-operating parks that we have as well.
Mm-hmm. So within Wasaga Beach Provincial Park, you have nationally, provincially, regionally, and locally significant features. These are cultural, natural, and recreational features of a wide range of items and significance. A few years ago, I can't remember when, the park staff won the Environmental Commissioner of Ontario's award.
3 years ago.
Yeah, for the Piping Plover program. This is an award they only offer once a year, so it was a big honor. And then Wasaga Beach Provincial Park is managed as part of a cluster of 7 parks. So Greg is the superintendent of 7 different parks, Wasaga Beach being one, Craig Leith being another over towards Collingwood, and then the remainders are non-operating parks on the escarpment. So a little bit about our legislation. We are regulated under the Provincial Parks and Conservation Reserves Act. This act came into force in 2007, and the purpose is to permanently protect a system of parks that includes representative ecosystems, that protects provincially significant values, maintains biodiversity, and provides opportunities for compatible, ecologically sustainable recreation. So that is the purpose of the entire provincial park system. It's in legislation, that's our mandate, these are our marching orders. The dedication is actually one of my favorite parts. It dedicates provincial parks and conservation reserves to the people of Ontario and visitors for their inspiration, education, health, recreational enjoyment, and other benefits. That, to me, encompasses everything that we want to do, everything that we can do, and everything that we offer the people of Ontario and visitors to the parks. To me, it's kind of the north arrow and the compass. Those are all things that we can achieve, and that's what we're aiming for. So the legislation outlines two principles, the maintenance of ecological integrity being the first priority, and that opportunities for consultation shall be provided. So those are very significant principles, again, identified in legislation, and we have a range of opportunities in order to meet those two different principles. The application of the land, it's set apart as a provincial park or conservation reserve by the Lieutenant Governor in General, or in Council, by regulation under the PPCRA. So that's how we decide where the Provincial Parks and Conservation Reserves Act applies, is by land defined by regulation under the PPCRA. So we'll get to one of the slides later on where the park boundary is, and that is a map that shows where the PPCRA applies. The legislation also identifies 4 objectives. So the pictures that you see are all from Wasaga Beach Provincial Park, and this is different ways that Wasaga Beach contributes to meeting the objectives of the PPCRA. So in the top right-hand corner, you see a prescribed burn that we did a couple of years ago in the dunes area, and that's to restore some of the functioning ecosystem that's there. Fire is a really important role that it plays there. So this was a controlled burn that we did with a number of staff, and it was very successful. So the first one is to permanently protect representative ecosystems, biodiversity, provincially significant elements, and to maintain these areas so that ecological integrity is maintained. The second, ecologically sustainable recreation. See people enjoying your lovely beach and the water. You providing opportunities for ecologically sustainable outdoor recreation and encouraging associated economic benefits. So if you link back to our entrepreneurial business model, that's where this comes into play. It's really important for us to get people through the gates. It's one of our objectives in a couple of different ways, and it's spelled out in our legislation. Third one is heritage education. You see the soldiers all up in a line there from one of the Wasaga Under Siege events. So this provides an opportunity for people that come to the park to learn more about their area, the natural and the cultural heritage values. And the last one is scientific research. It's hard to see, but those are 3 tiny people doing an ecological inventory on the point at Beach Area 1. And so our 4th objective is to facilitate research and provide points of reference for monitoring change on the broader landscape. Ecological integrity is a main point of the Provincial Parks and Conservation Reserves Act, and quite frankly this is one that we struggle with ourselves because it's a little bit hard to define in really specific terms. In the legislation, this is what ecological integrity is defined as. So a condition in which living and non-living parts of ecosystems and the composition and abundance of native species and biological communities are characteristic of their natural regions. So that's essentially things that should be in the right place are there in the right numbers, and that rates of change are unimpeded and ecosystem processes are unimpeded. So rates of change, it happens all the time. One change this year is the water levels. Those things are unimpeded, and then the various processes that happen are unimpeded. So that's the ideal of ecological integrity. When we make decisions, these elements are what we think about as we make decisions, but we understand that it's a balancing point, and that these are, again, my North Arrow example. We make decisions trying to point towards this, recognizing that it's not an end goal. It's not something that you can achieve and tick the box and say, yep, we've got ecological integrity. It's something we strive for and we learn from every day. So we're making decisions all the time that consider these different factors, among all the other parts of the PPCRA. So we were asked a bit about providing an update on beach maintenance. This is just the one slide, but I thought we could have a chat with Greg here. Feel free to ask questions. Just in general, the beachfront maintenance happens in accordance with the park master plan, which is not pictured on the screen, but more recently we developed the beach management secondary plan, which provides policy direction. It was consulted on and finalized in 2017. So that's what provides kind of big picture direction. And then at a more operational and implementation level, we have the beach maintenance protocols. So that's more of an internal document. It's reviewed, it's updated annually, it's more responsive than what the consulted on policy document says. So for example, this year was updated based on water levels, the type of erosion that happened, that kind of thing. Some of the photos you see detritus along the beach there, and then a couple park staff addressing a big, giant, ugly patch of Phragmites. So Greg, maybe you want to...
Sure, we can refer to, I handed out a couple of handouts here just on mock and detritus. I don't know if anybody doesn't have one, but I can get some more. Little presentation on that. I spoke about that before last year, and I think everybody around the table probably knows what muck or detritus is. Really, really stinky stuff that it consists of vegetation and material that's broken down in along the riverfront and from the Minising Swamp. So the way I look at the Minising Swamp, where all this stuff was formed, is nature's Brita. It's kind of our filter, and does all the good stuff with all the watersheds coming down into our watershed. It filters it all out, and within that Minising Swamp, there's all kinds of decaying vegetation. So it makes its way down the river and finds itself out into Wasaga Bay. I've had the opportunity over my time in the ministry to fly over the beach several times and see this stuff staging out in Wasaga Bay. So it's really evident, and I think there could be actually some pictures in the office here in the town office about it, the way it stages out in the bay. And then on an onshore breeze day, it works its way in and will be up on our beach, and we've got to deal with it. So a lot of complaints about it. It's smelly, it's disgusting stuff. You know, I walk through it, you know, when I'm swimming as well, and it's just not nice. It's not aesthetically pleasing like our beautiful white sand. We have to deal with it. Over the years, I've been around for a while. We've looked at new options. The best way that we've come up with to deal with this stuff is a York rake. So a York rake basically is like a backyard rake that you'd use to rake your lawn that affixes to a tractor. You rake it up as best as you can on shore, let it dry, and then we'll remove it. It's one of those things. We looked at a whole bunch of different beach tech equipment that we do own a beach tech. It's not good with detritus. It's super heavy. It's wet, and it's very hard to manage. So we've looked at sucker trucks, I guess, even that municipalities use for sewers. That was looked at years and years ago. Just wasn't very efficient. Sucked up a lot of sand, and that's kind of what the goal is too, is leave as much sand on the beachfront as we can. So in essence, as I started, rake up this detritus as best we can, let it dry. That becomes a bit of a discussion point, I guess, with some of our beach users, because we pile it and it smells. Once we pile it up, it is going to smell, and then we remove it. So we can't remove it instantly because of the weight, the sheer weight of it, and we want to kind of let everything settle out, the sand settle out and the water settle out. In the old days, we used to load it up and spread it along the beachfront, create dunes. We thought we were actually doing a pretty good thing, and those dunes help to protect values, protect properties, and also protect you know, some of our blow sand. So it's acting as a filter to stop a lot of our blow sand, to keep the sand on the beach. We were finding that as we were doing that, some of our invasives, which we'll talk a little bit about with like Phragmites, is being spread that way. So when we were spreading it in different areas, we were finding new patches of Phragmites in those locations. So we've discontinued that use or that practice. What we're doing now is we take it over. We've got a spot referred to as a racetrack. It's kind of a little area that we have in the park, and it's been dumped there. It is harmless. We test this stuff quite often. There is you know, there's no negative health issues with it other than the smell. So currently that's our practice. We have just been stockpiling it. I've said it before, I'd love to come up with a new use for it, you know, to spread it on your face and have some kind of benefit to it that way. But nobody's been knocking on my door for that yet. So anyway, this year is going to be a challenge. Meg talked about even collecting detritus with water levels. So that's another thing that's going to kind of impede us a little bit with collecting these pockets of detritus that wash up. Currently, we are at about 2 inches below our 1986 levels of water. It's increased significantly. I think our low water was from 1998 to 2013, and we had as much beach as I've ever seen here. If you go back into the records, 1964 was, I think, our lowest, and then again 1986 was our highest. So we're 2 inches away from the information we're getting right now, and it's still going up. So I've challenged a bunch of our staff, and I've been on the beachfront this year with new access corridors and means to get our 6-ton trucks in and our tractors to rake the little beach that we have or to remove detritus. Those access corridors are points that we've been looking at for creating are now full of water as of today. So this is going to go up, water's going to continue to go up to the end of July, and then we're going to start seeing it recede again, and this is cyclic, this is typical. I think we're probably in a stage where we're going to have high water for the next couple of years, and then we're going to go, it's going to cycle through again. It has, and history has shown that. That's going to be a challenge with expectations, with members of the public, with tourists, with landowners that reside in Wasaga Beach, to get these little chunks of detritus. We have removed in the past sections of vegetation to provide us a little bit larger beach. I'm glad we have left certain areas of vegetation. It's acting as nature's retaining wall right now for us. It's protecting values. Right in front of our sign shop, which we almost lost in 1986, we've got a grove of trees there in a natural area that we actually created through detritus. Right now we're okay. You know, those we're not getting too much erosion. Further down the beachfront, we're getting a lot of erosion, and you know, beautiful stands of barren grass that are eroding and dropping into the beachfront daily, or into the water daily. So the plan's going to be, unfortunately, it's going to be, there will be pockets we won't reach until water subsides a little bit. One thing that we do have in our back pocket is Mother Nature. Mother Nature gives us a south wind in the summertime, and that's an offshore breeze day. So on offshore breeze days, we can access some of these areas just because the water goes down. Ben Dassey and myself were down, trying to remember what beach area it was, last week. And we were standing in the water, and within an hour, in the same area, we saw the water recede by at least 15 feet in front of us, and then went down. So there will be an opportunity to access some of those areas that we won't get during the high water during those times. But we will not be driving through the water. We can't risk getting our equipment stuck, and it just doesn't make sense to drive through the water anyway with 5-ton trucks and tractors to access some of these little pockets to remove detritus.
Okay, I think Councillor Foster has a question on that.
Sure.
Sorry, Greg, if I can.
Yeah.
The high water is created, again, I understand there's a natural kind of rhythm to all of that. However, we can't deny this has been an extremely rainy May.
Sure.
April, May.
Yeah.
So there's natural stuff there.
Yeah.
If you look at the flooding that was in Ottawa, which
Yes.
was a lot of it was caused by damming in the rivers. So they had to let that water go in a way that didn't flood out Montreal. My understanding, though, is
Yeah.
St. Lawrence also is dammed up
Yes.
as well. So they've had their gates down for quite a while. They're starting to open them up. So once the Ottawa kind of went past Montreal, they're now letting. So is the damming of rivers also a contributing factor to this? And if so, if they open up every gate down on the St. Lawrence, how long would that take? Or would it ever be significant enough to be reflected in our bay?
It's a good question, Councillor Foster.
Thank you.
I
But
can tell he
don't-
really appreciated
Yeah,
that.
yeah, well thought out. I don't know I'm the expert to answer that question, to be honest with you. I think certainly it can affect it.
Okay.
But I do believe, you know, there's been a lot of talk about the way that dams are maintained and, you know, different agencies that are controlling dams should be letting out more. I think a lot of this is just sheer volume of rain and capacity.
Okay.
And I do know up in Perry Sound, Bracebridge, yeah, it's quite a problem. But I can't answer that, you know, 100% with 100% certainty, you know, that's going to affect those water levels.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Oh, sorry, George.
Thank you. Just a question with respect to the detritus.
Yeah.
Greg, as you know, it can kind of blow in at a moment's notice.
Sure.
And with the season being so short, is there a plan, or does Ontario Parks have a plan to tackle areas that are accessible, say the road allowance, the ends of the road allowances where you can get equipment in? And I'm thinking about the various beaches along the way, including Beach Area 1.
Yeah, thanks for the question, George. Absolutely, yeah. Anywhere that we can, and that's why I said these access corridors, the road allowances, we will. Certainly, if we can get there, we're gonna tackle it. It's just gone are the days where we would exit Beach Area 3, where our maintenance compound is at Park Office, and drive the whole 14 kilometers. We have to get strategic with it. So any area, I will commit to that any area that we can get to remove detritus, we're gonna deal with it. We've been doing that for years and years, and we will deal with it. It's just there will be some pinch points where we just can't get to. Doesn't mean that we're not going to. As I said, you know, if we can wait for the water to go down or something, we'll get to it. But Mother Nature, quite honestly, can take care of our problems really quick on an onshore breezestead. I know we've had a game plan to go down to, say, 17th Street or something to deal with detritus in the morning. And by that afternoon, Mother Nature has switched the winds to a west or a north wind, and it's taken the detritus away from us. And I think that's frustrating for some of our staff, where we put a whole lot of work on things and you make it look beautiful, and the very next day it's all there again. You know, you wake up in the morning, it's like garbage. You know, you make a pristine, beautiful beach, and all of a sudden plans change, and we realize that's our business and that's Mother Nature doing her thing. But I think she will help us out, Mother Nature, from time to time to take care of that detritus. But yeah, if there is an opportunity where we can get on to those road allowances, we will absolutely, George. So detritus, I don't know if there's anything else about detritus. I can move on a little bit about Phragmites and the invasive species. So we've been tackling this. We've been working with detritus for, I'm thinking back to probably 2005, somewhere in there. There's a few options, and the option that we come up with the best is that we will let the frag grow up until about probably early August, where seed heads are starting to pop out, and then we'll take it and we'll cut it. If we cut it before that time, the plant is just going to recover and it's going to be all for naught. So what we do is it grows up, it gets its seed heads, we cut it, and within a month the new plan is to apply herbicides. We've done that in the past too. There is a challenge with herbicides and, you know, working around water and whatnot, but we're going to work through that. We've got some different options with herbicides. I do have staff that are trained with the application of herbicides, and it stresses the plant. So again, it's a critical time. It's a critical window. Once those seed heads come, you cut those seed heads off, the plant is stressed, and then you hit it again with herbicides. So we're very fortunate, even though we've got a lot of frag here, it's nothing like it is down on around Rondo and places on Lake Erie and whatnot. And you probably all have seen Phragmites on the 401 going towards Eastern Ontario. It's beautiful looking. Not so much on our beachfront. My wife almost planted it in our garden, and I thought it was pretty nice too. But it's incredibly invasive. What we're seeing now with our high water is that the rime zones on the bottom, the root mass, is all being exposed from all those areas we've cut. They've been buried in sand, so it's very hard for us to find and see. But as the high water comes, now it's being exposed, and we'll deal with it. You know, we'll rake it up or gather it as best as we can. So
I think the thing about Phragmites too, the treatment, it's a long game. You can't just do it once and then have it be really effective, and you won't have to do it again and you say, oh good, we're done.
Yeah.
It's one of those things that takes constant treatment and attention. So this will happen, you know, over the years and multiple times in the same patches, and as it spreads or changes, they have to adjust and adapt on the go. And it applies to other invasives as well. So there's Japanese knotweed
Yeah.
and white sweet clover and other things as well. Frag is kind of the big one that's addressed on the beachfront, but it's one of those things that you just have to keep at in a kind of relentless way to make headway.
For sure, and Scots pine too, and poplar.
Yeah.
Those are some of the bigger, shrubbier trees that we attacked last year, and we were taking out of those vegetated areas. Frag alone last year, we took out 1,200 kilograms actually of Phragmites. That's a dry weight. So you collect it. The staging is you collect it, you put it in garbage bags, you let it cook or dry for a month, and then you can dispose of it because it's no longer a problem for spreading and viability reasons. So it is a huge process, and as Meg said, it's just, you got to keep hitting it time after time. It's like a George Foreman fight, you know, a 12-round fight. You just got to keep hammering it. So, any questions about Frag? Okay.
Any other questions about beachfront maintenance at this time?
Councillor Belanger?
Thank you, Chair. Just a question on actual infrastructure, you know, which we've talked before, like, you know, picnic tables, parking lot, shelters, like some of the washrooms. Some of those things have seemed to are getting very aged and to the point where it's no longer an enjoyment for a visitor to the park. You know, we talked about some collaboration or partnerships or some things that might be done, but it just doesn't seem to ever move past a conversation.
Right. So good question, Councillor Belanger. I think as far as infrastructure, I think we've been very lucky in Ontario Parks that within our 9 comfort stations that are located, actually 11 comfort stations that are located on the beachfront, we've replaced all of them since 1999. To me, that's a good news story. Picnic tables are always an issue. You know, I myself have been a moderator or a mediator with people on the beachfront over picnic tables, you know, fighting for them because we just don't have enough for everybody. We find they go missing a lot, and we see them scattered, you know, throughout the town. It's a constant battle to keep up with it. We get a lot of graffiti on them. We get a lot of vandalism with them as well. So I'd like to think that, you know, we're doing our best with what we have. We do have a roving program that there's a couple of students that go around in a pickup truck and fix the broken board or whatever. Gone are the days where we've replaced the whole table. I think it's a big waste to do that. We're trying to recycle new planks through. It's constant. It's every day. You know, we're replacing broken boards or burned boards or whatever. We're always open to ideas. You know, if the town has some ideas or resources, we're always open to that. So.
On the topic of washrooms, just to let the rest of council know, the CAO and I did meet with Jim Wilson this morning, and that was something that we brought up to him about the Allenwood washrooms.
Yes.
And how we would like to keep that going. I don't know if you have an update.
I sure do, and
okay.
Thanks, Your Worship. I was going to be a little bit later on,
Oh,
but
I'm
it's a
sorry,
great
I'm
talk.
jumping
Right?
ahead.
It's a great topic right now. So we will be proceeding with. It's been a challenge. It's been a large challenge, and part of that challenge is getting interested contractors to come to the table. We've been working on this for 3 years. We've put it out 3 times to bid. In my time here, I've never had a problem getting contractors to come to build these infrastructure or upgrade any of our facilities. We finally had a couple that were interested. We had a few hiccups along the way with deliverables and the scope of the project. We've ironed out that, and we have got approval to proceed. That, working with the local, the contractors that will be coming in, we've got a date of the fall. as a fall startup, so right after Labor Day. Part of that was their availability and also the business of the summer. We don't want to go into Allenwood, Wasaga and just close everything and there's not going to be any facilities for people to use. So I think it's a great compromise. We want to do it and we want to do it right. So to me, this is great news.
It is great news, so we can expect nice washrooms there next year.
Absolutely.
Okay, perfect.
Absolutely. And our close date is going to be for the fall, but of course, you know, that area will be closed for the season, so it'll be too late for this year. But yeah, we're pretty excited about that.
That's great, thank you.
Yeah.
Councillor Foster?
Well, that was asked and basically answered. I just, for a little clarity, we're talking fall of 2019?
Correct.
Okay, just wanted to be
Yes.
clear, not
Yeah.
just any fall.
Yes.
Then there is a follow-up on that one though, is there are areas, and we've got the plovers that come in
Mhm.
and believe it or not, I think they're a great tourist attraction, or they have the potential to be.
Agreed.
And, but when they're there, and the one time they nested on New Wasaga,
Yes.
my recollection is there is then a
Moratorium.
moratorium, no fly zone. Well,
Yep.
that's inappropriate for birds, but anyway, there's a moratorium
Yes.
on maintenance for an area that the plovers had done. Is that for a decade?
Sure. So I'll comment on that, Councillor Foster. They first showed up in 2012 in that area in Wasaga Beach. They were successful. They had some chicks that hatched there, and unfortunately they were predated, and we lost those chicks. We then again had those birds down there in 2015. So to answer your question with timing, anytime we do have an active nest, there's a 10-year period that we can do any kind of beach maintenance. And the clock starts again once we have another nesting pair. So, you know, the nest hasn't been there, or it hasn't been active since 2015. If we had birds there tomorrow, then we'd have to start the clock all over again. I've commented and said this in the past, that science is always changing, and the way we look at things, and we want to make sure it's for the betterment of the birds. This is what the game plan is. We want to ensure that we've got these things around for a while. I believe in the last few years, I think we've had 64 fledglings, and this is fantastic for this population. So it's put a huge strain on expectations down in New Wasaga Beach about, you know, I get a lot of calls to say the beach is filthy. And I first say, is there garbage there, or is it vegetation? Because a lot of people think that vegetation is a dirty beach. Vegetation on a beach means a beautiful beach, in my opinion. And, you know, for our park's opinion, and it's saved our bacon in a lot of ways, especially with the high water now. New Wasaga is changing daily. I'm down there all the time. There's some beautiful, we've got embryonic dunes that have been formed down there now, and you know, pans within those the back dunes, and some of those pans are filling with water now, and it's groundwater. It's just filling up. It's not because it's a wet sludge hole. It's groundwater that's down there. These embryonic dunes that are forming are actually trapping some sand now, and I'm seeing some beautiful sand down in those areas. So, anyway, getting back to your question, it's 10 years.
Okay, and then, sorry, just to follow up on that. So if there's a nesting site
Mm-hmm.
this year or 9 years ago,
Yeah.
what kind of distance are you putting on each side?
Yeah. So that distance is going to change dependent on nests.
Okay.
So because in 2012 we had a nest that was here per se, and then in 2015 we had a nest here, we go 500 meters on either side, so it's a total of a kilometer. That's moving dependent on active nests.
Okay.
So in 2012 we had an area that was 500. In 2015 that expanded because now we had 2 nests. So we kind of had to encompass both of those nests,
All right.
if that makes sense.
It does, thank you.
I'm just looking at the clock, so we'll have to
Carry it on.
Sure.
yeah. Councillor Boulanger, and then we're going to move on.
Okay, thank you. One more question, just on the dredging material
Mhm.
that was put on New Wasaga Beach. As you know, that's still an issue for a number of residents.
Absolutely.
And I don't know if they've gotten a definitive answer. I think the answer is we're going to leave what's there.
Mhm.
But I don't know if the residents have really been told that definitively. But
Thanks for the question, Councillor Blanchet. The individuals that I have met with, I've been very clear about that. You know, constantly looking at the area. It does lie within piping plover habitat, so it limits us a little bit how we're going to deal with it. There is filter cloth that is remaining in that area, and we've been removing that filter cloth as it becomes exposed. So, you know, it's one of those things that it's buried under probably about 4 feet of sand, and there is some rubble down there. There was always rubble down there. There was always stone down there, but some of the rubble is left over. All of that rubble, as of last week, was buried in beautiful sand. So, is it something that we're looking at? Absolutely. Our hands are tied, you know, when it comes to removing a lot of things, equipment, because of the protection of the birds, but we're always considering things.
Okay, I just had some new inquiries, so I wanted to make sure that I pass them on to you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
All right, the management plan update. So I'll move through these relatively quickly, but stop me if you want to discuss anything. Ontario Parks and the Ministry of the Environment, Conservation and Parks now makes planning decisions within a framework. So this is just a visual example of the framework. We started at the top with broad strategic type directions, so the Provincial Parks and Conservation Reserves Act, policies that apply across the entire provincial park system, and that sort of thing. So that's the upper level. We move down to lower and more site-specific levels as we go through. So the second level is it's land use planning, so looking at where there will be provincial parks across the province, or whether we would use Crown land for different purposes, such as general use areas or conservation reserves. The third box down on the right-hand side there, you see, is the area where we do management planning. So that is developing a site-specific management plan for each provincial park or conservation reserve in the province. And then the lowest level is the implementation and operation level, and that's where we apply our class environmental assessment for provincial parks and conservation reserves. It's similar to your municipal class A, but just a little bit different. So as you move through the levels, you get more and more specific about the direction that's established for your particular provincial park. And the way we write our management plans is to follow Ontario's Protected Area Planning Manual. It's developed in 2014 and has a series of guidelines and templates associated with it. So, you know, we have kind of marching orders that start at a broad strategic level, and then they kind of filter down to get narrower and narrower to deal with the very specific site conditions at your environment in Wasaga Beach. So the broad stuff applies across the entire province, and as we move down, you get to the very specific Wasaga Beach considerations. So essentially, this slide is showing how all of the different levels will inform the next one down, and even sometimes the one above, of where we're going. So all the decisions that we make have to consider all of the 4 different levels and be in line with all of those. So this is the kind of management planning all in one slide. It's dense, there's a lot of information there, but it kind of captures everything that we're going to be doing in the park management planning process. So you'll see the image on the top right-hand side of the circles. That's the management planning cycle as defined in the Protected Areas Planning Manual. So it starts on a continuous loop, essentially, with stage 1 is scoping, so that's looking at the scope of the project and how broad we're going to go. Stage 2, information analysis, so gathering information that will be relevant for park planning, in which that will inform decision making. Stage 3 is actually an optional stage, which we only do for complex planning projects, so that's developing management options. Stage 4 is developing a preferred management direction, which is essentially a draft policy document that's circulated for public comment. Stage 5 is finalizing that document, then we implement. And then stage 7 and 8 is monitoring and adjusting as we go through implementation and as we learn when we're applying the management plan. So it's based essentially on the assessment and identification of different values. Each park will have its own specific values. Wasaga Beach has a lot of them. There's a range of different ones, and as I talked about before, varying levels of significance, from national significance down to local significance. So the end game is to develop a management plan that provides policy direction for about a 20-year time horizon. That's generally what we look at. And the planning process for Wasaga Beach will incorporate stages 1, 2, and 3 we're going to do together to kind of move forward with the process a bit more efficiently. Stage 4 and then 5 will be the end of our planning process with the management plan. Then we move into, as I said, the implementation and adjustments phase. The documents, you'll see the table at the bottom. They talk about the scoping of, or the planning stage on the left-hand side, the document that's produced in the individual planning stage, and when the opportunities for consultation occur. The PPCRA, Provincial Parks and Conservation Reserves Act, mandates that you have at least 2 opportunities for consultation, so those are where our 2 opportunities will occur. The background information document and management options document are 2 separate documents. They'll be released for public comment shortly. And then the next opportunity will be to review the preliminary management plan. That's a little bit where the rubber hits the road. It will be what the draft policies look like. It's sometimes a little bit easier for people to understand how our proposals may or may not impact them and then be able to participate. Question?
Councillor Belanger?
Thank you, Chair. So if there's a change that occurs, it goes through the same process, I believe, as the overall. But the reason I bring that up is just at a high level, we've seen just recently that there may be a move to allow consumption of alcoholic beverages in parks or other areas, and I'm assuming that will become a discussion at some point. So I just didn't know if you were going to touch on that at all today, or if that's going to go through this process, and council will also be interested, I think, in talking about it as well.
So through you, Madam Chair, alcohol in parks it's not in provincial parks right now. That is, we've got our own legislation. I think that's municipal parks that, will be allowing alcohol. That's not to say that one day things change. I don't know. I can't predict that. But as of right now, it's under totally different legislation.
Okay, thank you.
So, I'm sorry. The provincial parks where you have a campsite, it's considered your residence, and you can drink alcohol on your campsite. But you can't leave the campsite to go to a day use area or public space. So in camping parks, you can have alcohol on your campsite, but it's because it's considered your residence.
Good clarification. Thanks.
Councillor Wells?
Legislation had.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Greg, I'm not intending this to be in any way critical, so take it in that context, but I'm not sure the year that Mr. Fisher, well, I'm getting the sense that we're kind of starting this management plan. Like, we're talking about stage 1 scoping and information analysis. Am I correct to say that's where we are at, stage 1, and starting to work through?
Right now, we're actually in the stage 2 and 3 part.
Okay.
And we will be releasing those 2 documents for comment shortly. They provide an opportunity. It'll be the first time the public and stakeholders and local Indigenous communities get to participate in the planning process. But we have started it quite some time ago with the information gathering and scoping project.
Okay. So that leads to my question. I'm not sure the year that John Fisher became the superintendent.
2007, I think it was.
2007. And I remember sitting here at that time and him telling us that his primary mandate as the superintendent was to undertake the new park management plan. So I repeat, I'm not trying to be critical, but so that's 11 years ago, and we're now somewhere between stage 1 and stage 2. I'm struggling to understand how this process works or how it's going to work going forward and what our timelines are, given that I was told in 2007 we were undertaking the process and we had a person specifically here to do that, and we're 11 years later and we're back at stage 1, stage 2.
Can you touch on the timeline?
I'm just struggling to understand how this has come about.
Not all governments go as fast as municipal.
There's slow, and then there's
So can you just maybe touch on, we get that it's taken
Yeah.
a long time to get to this point, but where are we at timeline-wise moving forward?
So the timeline moving forward, the mandated consultation periods are 45 days. We move into the next stage following that. There are no set timelines for the entire process. There's nothing in legislation or in our policy that guides, drop dead dates or anything that'll set a timeline for this. Essentially, it all depends on consultation. It depends on the complexity of issues. As you may know, this is a very complex place with a lot of history. And I don't have a really great reason or explanation of why it's taken so long, but I'm really happy to say that it's moving forward.
Okay.
We are in the process of trying to get it out the door and to a point where the public and everybody who really cares about this place can participate.
So if I hear you correctly, we're not going to be waiting 11 years to get to stage 4.
I really hope not. I'm getting gray hair as I go through this process,
Thank you.
so
Thank you.
it will be nice to
And
move
to
on.
add to that, Councillor Wells, we want to do this right. It's
Well,
it's
I
long
totally
overdue,
agree. I
and
totally
it's
agree.
really important that we get lots of this consultation. We want as many people to comment on this
Yeah.
as we can, and we do. We want to do this right.
Yeah.
This is big for you as a town. It's big for us in parks, and it's going to be huge for tourists
Yeah.
too. So,
I totally agree, Greg, and I repeat, I didn't mean it to
No.
be critical,
yeah.
but I think unfortunately the validity of the process, the faith in the process, the understanding of the process has suffered dramatically because of the period of time it's been taking. I think a lot of people have, from what I hear, a lot of people have just kind of written it off. And that's unfortunate because we need their involvement.
Sure.
But because of what's gone on in the timelines, they've kind of just said, oh, it'll never happen, kind of thing. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. we
Anyway, I'll
understand.
leave it there.
All
Okay,
right.
Councillor Kenny, and then we'll move on.
Okay, quick question. Greg, in your development of your master plan, have you looked at addressing, or is it at a higher level, cannabis use?
I guess we're working on that, Councillor Kenny. It's all brand new. This is all brand new stuff. So in Wasaga Beach, in our parks now, we have gone to smoke-free. So all on our beaches, they're classified as a sporting area. All of the swimming beaches, we do water samples and whatnot. So we're going smoke-free. That will address cannabis on the beachfront. Within the provincial parks themselves, in green spaces, as long as they're not around playgrounds or comfort stations, people will be allowed to smoke cannabis. We are still working out our park policies when it comes to how we're going to do that and how we're going to train our enforcement officers to deal with cannabis. It's so brand new to us that we're still working through it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Okay.
Is there a separation between like beach and where smoking is permitted? Like I'm saying, okay, they're not allowed on the beach, but where does the beach end and the park begin?
Yeah, and great question. It's going to be a little bit of a gray zone. So I'm saying green area. So if there's, the park is kind of delineated almost from the sand to some vegetation and whatnot. It's going to be in the park areas, up in the grassy areas that we cut grass. That basically we're cutting grass and things. That's where it's going to be allowed. And I can touch on that very quickly too. With smoke-free, we are not going to be enforcing that legislation. It's not within our legislation to enforce. Simcoe County Health will be doing that. We have started the process of putting up 50 signs already. More are coming. We ran out of signs to put up along our beachfront that it's going to be smoke-free.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'll charge along. So we have a planning team that's been put together for this planning process. The team members are the park superintendent. George is our CAO, representative of the town of Wasaga Beach. We have a tourism industry advisor from the Ministry of Tourism, Culture and Sport. Senior park planner with the Southwest Zone, an ecologist, myself a park planner, and a GIS technician. So it's a technical team. It's a fairly small team, but it has broad representation from a range of different sources. So we have been involved in preparing documents, reviewing information, and we will provide input based on all of our various areas of expertise. Also, it's a connection point for different stakeholders and external individuals to make connection with the planning process, either in a formal way or an informal way. This comes up at many parks, and Wasaga particularly, but how tourism is incorporated into park planning. So it's kind of a wordy slide, which I apologize for, but it outlines how tourism and visitation is really important to provincial parks for a couple of different reasons. The PPCRA purpose and objectives talk about having ecologically sustainable recreation, heritage appreciation, and those associated economic benefits that we talked about earlier. Our business model, as I mentioned, is entrepreneurial. So the visitation that we get through the gates, the people buying things in our parks, is critical to our ongoing success. Tourism, this is something our tourism industry advisor and our planning team talked about, that tourism is really an outcome of something. It is the result of good planning. It is the result of providing opportunities that are broadly interesting and appealing to a wide range of people. But tourism in itself is not considered of value according to our planning manual. But the infrastructure and the facilities and the number of people using the space is considered in our planning decisions and as we develop the park. So it's a little bit of a gray area, but tourism is important to provincial parks. It's important to the management planning process, but you may not see it in the word tourism in quite the way you might expect, but don't think that that means that it's not being considered in a range of different ways.
Okay, and Councillor Watson, you have your hand up for a question.
Thank you, Worship. Yeah, that statement really caught me. The tourism is not considered a value at all.
So that's not what I said, sorry to interrupt, but I just want to clarify. Tourism is not considered a value for the purpose of planning under the Protected Areas Planning Manual. So it's a little bit different. The operation of the park, tourism visitation is considered really important. I know it's splitting hairs a little bit, but it's just an important distinction.
Well, I think it is splitting hairs because that's always been, we're always butting up against that. We obviously have tourism initiatives in Wasaga Beach, and we're always butting up to roadblocks with the parks to try and promote the area, and I see very little promotion going on from parks to bolster our initiatives to bring people into town. People still keep saying tourism is our #1 industry. I disagree. I don't think it is, but it's a component of Wasaga Beach, and I would certainly hope with this planning that we can talk about tourism a lot more, because we can't be a cookie cutter format. Wasaga Beach was initially, if you look back in provincial statements, the playground of Ontario, because we were the closest large beach to the city of Toronto, the GTA, and people were encouraged to come up here and enjoy that. And when we don't have the support of parks to bolster our initiatives, it's very difficult for us. And secondary to that, is there any plans on actually doing camping in the 4,000 some odd acres that you have here? We are going to be losing a lot of our campgrounds that came into Wasaga Beach over the years. We're getting more and more urbanized all the time. These campgrounds are within high growth areas. They're probably going to be lost to redevelopment. And I think campgrounds are very important to us, but we've never had that opportunity with parks. I would certainly hope that would come forward in the planning part of here. So is that under consideration at all?
Yes, it is. I'm happy to say that it is. It's part of the options analysis that we talked about earlier in the planning process slide. So looking at providing overnight accommodation as an option here.
Okay. And just on another note, when Greg and George and I met probably a couple of months ago now, I can say our discussions with Greg were very positive about working together in tourism and that type of thing. So I think we feel good about that. Councillor Blanchet.
Thank you, Chair. Just a question. I get that tourism is an outcome and infrastructure is included, but programming is a big part of attracting tourists, and it doesn't seem to be spoken to in the plan. And I know we deal with it all the time, and generally under the old M&R they had final right of refusal, but I would think that programming would be part of the discussion.
Yeah, it will be. Yeah, in a variety of different ways.
Okay, just not articulated very
well. Yeah, it will be. I wish I could say more and share more about what we're doing, but it's just not. We're not at that stage yet. But there will be lots of opportunity to talk about different activities on the beach, different uses, programming, that kind of thing.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we're gonna let Megan kind of barrel
Yep.
through the next
Yes.
5 slides.
Sorry.
That's okay.
It's a hot topic. Okay, the park boundary. The park boundary is being reviewed. Initially, we talked about doing it as a coordinated process with the management planning process, but the complexity of the lands issues and really strange things that have turned up in Wasaga Beach have meant that we're going to move forward with the management plan, and we're going to carry on with the park boundary, but they're not linked up quite the way we had intended them to be. The image that you see is an example. It is a screen capture of what the current park regulation plan looks like. So as I mentioned earlier, park boundaries are regulated under the PPCRA. This is a descriptive map that's filed according to that regulation, and it describes the park boundary and where the PPCRA applies. So this is a bit of a strange thing, but it doesn't necessarily align with land ownership. Which adds to the complexity, particularly in a place like this where land ownership and acquisition has been interesting over the last couple of decades. The last review was in the 1990s. We know it needs to be updated, and that's the process we're working towards. And so we're in the information gathering phase. We will be looking for the town of Wasaga Beach to participate in providing information and looking at the analysis of options. Part of the review will consider changes to the park boundary. For example, we acquired a property in the dunes area that we would like to add to the park through regulation. As we go through the process, that will be one of the changes that we consider. At this time, there is not a list or anything like that of all of the changes that we would consider. It's just too early to do that sort of analysis or identification. So provincially owned land can be acquired. It can also be disposed of. It's very uncommon, particularly if it is regulated as a provincial park. Because if you remember way back at the beginning of the presentation, we talked about the permanent protection of protected areas and provincial parks. It cannot be exchanged. It's just an old way of doing business, and unfortunately we can't do that anymore. Consultation will occur on any of the proposed park boundary changes. Consultation occurs with Indigenous communities, stakeholders, and the public. So we've been preparing management planning and boundary mailing lists over a number of years. So all of those people will receive notice before anything is finalized. So that was the park boundary. Did we need any?
Is there questions on the park boundary? I saw some hands
Yeah.
here.
Okay.
Mr. Foster?
Be quick. I guess my question is, when you're looking at the park boundary, there are little pieces that stick out
Yeah.
periodically. I assume that when you're doing that, you'll be looking and saying what, or from a planning point of view, what's the highest and best use for that piece of land? So in other words, if there's cottage, 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 park lot, cottage, 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 or house, house, house,
Yeah.
would there be the thought process that the highest and best use would be residential, not, assuming it's not an access to the park per
Yeah.
se?
So we don't use the term highest and best use. We just follow a totally different planning process. The provincial policy statement doesn't apply to provincial parks, so we follow our own way of looking at things. We would look at park values, so look at recreational values. Is it an access point? Does it provide picnic areas? Look at natural values. Does it provide habitat? Does it provide habitat connectivity? There's a whole range of things. Operational values. Is it a place where the park staff used to park their vehicles in order to do the patrols on the beach? So there's a range of values that we would consider when we're looking at the option analysis, and that's what we would use to make decisions, to make proposals that people can comment on.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Watson?
Thank you. I think the process would be deeming it surplus, and that's happened quite a bit over the years. The park has deemed certain pieces of land that are not within the boundary surplus. Examples across from my house. There's now 14 brand new townhomes on a piece of M&R land that was sold to the public, and that's generating taxation for Wasaga Beach. So there's been a real outcry from people about these beachfront lots that hopefully, if they're outside the park boundary, that they would be put back into the mainstream to generate taxation for the town. Quick question on the Indigenous communities. Do you see any concerns? There's a huge land claim all the way down the shore of Georgian Bay by Indigenous communities. Do you see any concerns with the provincial park here that could be affected?
So hard to say in the long term. In the short term, there's no land claim that currently applies to the land of Wasaga Beach Provincial Park. The lake bed is of interest to the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, but it's something that evolves over time, and something we don't have a lot of control over. At the moment, there's no land claim to the park land itself.
Thank you. Councillor Belanger?
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple quick things. One is, and again, not to be critical, but we were led to believe in future meetings that we were a lot further along. In fact, we were told that the end of 2019, early 2020, that this would likely be done. And now we're seeing that we're in the information gathering stage. That's quite a departure from what we've been told. The other thing that, and our Director of Public Works is here, I know there, out near Klondike Park, there was a small piece of property that we were looking to exchange to do some road work under the old terms. And so is that grandfathered, or does that have to?
Yeah, the exchange word is difficult. There's different processes that we would follow. So a piece of land can be disposed of, so we have to deregulate it from the provincial park, and then another ministry declares it surplus, and we can acquire land, but they sort of happen in parallel rather than directly related.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right? Okay.
Oh, sorry,
Sorry, George.
I did have a question, just if I may, Your Worship, just with respect to time frame. Now that the two park processes are somewhat going to be separated and kind of one follow the other, do you have an estimate in terms of time frame to be dealing with this component?
Right now we're developing a statement of work with the Office of the Surveyor General of Ontario. At the time when we get to the end of that statement of work, we should have a better understanding of timelines. Sorry, can't give you more than that. Okay. Consultation, as I mentioned earlier, the Provincial Parks and Conservation Reserves Act identifies consultation as one of the principles that we must follow. That happens for management planning as well as the park boundary review. Both are considered environmentally significant under the Environmental Bill of Rights. Therefore, we need to do broad consultation with a range of different audiences, including the Indigenous communities that are local and have historical interest in this area, stakeholders and members of the public. Those involvement opportunities can occur informally and formally. We meet with people all the time. In formal settings, we do public consultation by posting on the Environmental Registry of Ontario and other ways. People can participate by looking at draft planning documents, providing their input, looking at park boundary options, sharing information. If we've missed something, if we don't know about something, we want to know about it. We want to be sure that we're making good decisions based on good information. Identifying values and opportunities and different goals, different priorities. That's the kind of information that we want to get. Some of the audiences that we look at, Ontario Parks does a range of surveys I think it's every 3 years, we do general public surveys. So it indicates that even people who don't come to provincial parks place a high value on them. Visitors themselves, they have a direct impact over the decisions that we make, so those are the kind of folks that visit the park all the time, that will have a really good idea of what we can do and what we should do. Municipalities, as you know, provincial parks operate within municipal boundaries in almost every single part of the province, except up in the north. So in the south, every provincial park is part of a municipality in some way or another. We offer tourism opportunities, and we can be an economic driver. The Indigenous communities, we've identified 13, I think, that may have an interest in the provincial park. So they've received communication about what we're doing and the kind of proposals that we may look at. So the other part would be environmental, non-governmental organizations, so the NCC, CPAWS, Ontario Nature, OFAH. There's a range of different environmental partners. And then the tourism sector. We're obviously a big participant in that, and we offer a lot of opportunities. So those are the kind of audiences that we're looking for. Some of the methods we use, as I mentioned, environmental registry notices on, there's a website that's publicly accessible, so that will have both management planning and park boundary notices. The regulatory registry, when we get to a point where we're changing the park boundary, that requires a regulation change under the PPCRA, so that will have a regulatory registry notice. I realize some of these are just sort of internal, and if you don't know what they are or how to access them, I'm happy to provide that kind of information. There'll be direct mailings to a mandatory contact list that Ontario Parks maintains for a wide range of stakeholders, as well as the mailing list that we've been developing at the park through a variety of processes. We have direct mailings and meetings with Indigenous communities, website posting, newspaper ads, on-site notices. Any way that we can get the word out, we're happy to do so. The comment periods are 45 days, generally speaking, and those are, yeah, they'll be 45 days. So meetings and open houses as required throughout the process. We're happy to meet with stakeholder groups, individuals, we do it all the time. So, sorry to charge through the last, but here we are.
Well, thank you very much. That was extremely informative. I'm hoping our newspaper over there will put some of that good stuff in the paper. He says no. And maybe our communications department, I know that these meetings are live streamed and we put them, but even if we could separate out this piece of it and kind of highlight it on our website, just because there was a lot of good information shared today. So thank you both for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Thank you. And I believe we have a motion.
Your worship, should I take the comments?
Oh, we've got hands. Hang on.
Quick
You're not off the hook.
Oh.
Okay. Councillor Wells and then Councillor Kinney.
Quick comment. I appreciate the presentation, I appreciate the detail, and I also appreciate the balancing act you're caught in between the various regulations and so forth. But I guess it's always been a concern for me, having lived here for 40 some odd years, that, and I didn't come away feeling any better about this necessarily today, that provincial parks, and George alluded to this, provincial parks seem to be operating, whether it's MECP or MNRF, on a principle of one size fits all. Granted, there are a few minor subtleties, going on between them, but I look at Wasaga Beach Provincial Park, and I don't compare it to Algonquin Park. I don't compare it to Pelee Island. I don't compare it to Craigleith. And yet, when I listen, and I won't go through all of them, but I made a bunch of notes here. Ecological integrity is our first priority. Ecological sustainability, encourage associated economic benefits. I'm not sure that I see those two as being compatible in some way. If you're encouraging economic benefit, somehow the ecological benefit may have to take a second spot, not become the high priority. Beach management, okay, you've indicated about how you're going to try and update that. Control for planning level 3 statements plans, all focused on the whole ecological side of it for the most part. Visitation is a critical entrepreneurial thing, is a statement that was made, yet it didn't get reflected in how this beach, this park, is totally different from the other ones I mentioned. So without going into many more of the statements, I guess I hope that through this park management plan, and I'm not sure if you're even in a position to do so, but I hope that the differences, the fact that this was created in the first place as a tourism place for Wasaga Beach, and I guess for years I've thought that this provincial park particularly should have been taken out of MNRF and turned over to Ministry of Tourism as its management function, but that's not going to happen, so at least I won't live long enough to see it. But I guess I hope through the park management plan that this whole concept of this park is being designated as a high tourism focus is actually reflected in the park management plan that comes forward. Because to be honest, I'm not hearing that.
So I'll comment quickly before I let Meg answer that as well. Councillor Wells, I would agree that we are different. And I think that's why we are taking our time with this one. There are cookie cutter things that we do have in the planning document, but we are looking at that. I really believe that's why we're taking so long. We're looking at, we are a park within a town, within a municipality. So we're taking all of these things into consideration. But there are things, our mandates that we have being a provincial park, and that's a good thing. I think that's a good thing for even the community because of different protection values and things like that are good news stories. So I'll let you.
Actually, I'd like to just actually comment on this because it goes back to my comment earlier that when George and I met with Greg, there was an understanding there that we are a tourism town. We have to respect each other's legislation and what we're trying to do on the town side, and I think that there is an understanding there to work together to get something maybe better than what it has been in the past. But also through the ministry's offices, you know, both ministries, when we've met with them, they're recognizing that we need to be working together on this. So I'm feeling good that we're getting to, it's going to be a better resolve than maybe what we've had in the past. So, sorry, did you have something you wanted to add?
Oh, well, I think in terms of the fact that this park is different, I mean, earlier I talked about the fact that we have a golf course and a farm and swimming pools, and we all operate within that same legislation, and all of those different levels that I talked about, they provide an opportunity to take those big picture, big statements, and then apply them in a way that makes sense at the very specific site level. So Wasaga Beach is not going to have a cookie cutter management plan that's going to be the same as Craigleith or Long Point or Sandbank. It's going to be its own management plan, and it's developed by the people who love this place and have input into this place. So that's important to me. You know, what it's going to look like, that's for all of us to decide.
Okay, so we're going to go to Councillor Kinney, Councillor Foster, and then we're going to read the motion. Councillor
Worship,
Kinney?
I'll be very quick. Number one, any thoughts on increasing the exposure of our Nordic Center? 'Cause I love it.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have been in contact with the town to come up with some ideas for that, because we would like to promote it as well. Absolutely.
Okay, next one. I sit on the Accessibility Advisory Committee, and during one of our meetings, there was a thought process and a question about the accessibility of your play equipment in Beach Area 5.
Mm-hmm.
Would you be open to that committee chatting with you?
Absolutely. Always willing to talk. You know, when it comes to purchasing more equipment and things like that, that's a capital discussion. Always interested in chatting though.
The committee doesn't want miracles, they just want to have information shared.
Absolutely.
And the last thing is, you're talking about stakeholders, way of getting things out. Can the town help you with that?
Yes, and you have in the past, actually. You've posted notices and sent out letters, and it's been terrific.
Good, thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Foster.
Thank you. And I'm expanding a little bit on what Councillor Wells said, that, you know, we always say this is, we all believe Wasaga Beach is unique and it is in its own way, but it's very different than Algonquin. It's not a park in the middle of nowhere. It's a park in the middle of somewhere. And we've got residential, and a lot of it was created through expropriation back in 1974, etc. Like that whole area was taken over. But again, the integration between the residents and businesses and the tourists have to be the highest interest. Because if you look at Algonquin, the residents there are like moose and bears and owls and stuff. But you've also got people who've got houses and cottages and all that. So it has to be treated completely differently. You have to have, in each case, and I'm certainly saying you have to have complete respect in Algonquin for the moose and etc. But the same thing here. But the challenge you have is that a lot of our population doesn't, you know, roar, squeak, and squawk. They talk, and so you have to be cognizant. And I know your process will be cognizant of the residents and the businesses as well, because this is absolutely unique. It's a park inside a municipality, not a park inside a wilderness.
Okay. Thank you. Our motion is moved by Councillor Kinney, seconded by Councillor Watson. Resolved that Committee of the Whole receive the presentation from Ms. Megan Pomeroy and Mr. Greg Forbes of the Ontario Provincial Parks pertaining to an update of the Ontario Parks Master Plan and Maintenance Management Plan for information.
Thank you, Your Worship. We'll call for the vote. Councillor Belanger?
In favor?
Councillor Foster?
In favor?
Councillor Kinney?
In favor?
Councillor Watson?
In favor.
Councillor Wells?
In favor?
Mayor Byfolchi in favor. The vote is 6 in favor and 0 opposed. The motion is carried.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Go Rams.
Yes.
Go Rams.
It's moved by Councillor Wells, seconded by Councillor Kinney, resolved that pursuant to section 239 2B and F of the Municipal Act 2001 as amended, the next portion of the Committee of the Whole meeting of May 30th, 2019 be closed to the public to discuss personal matters about an identifiable individual and to receive advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege.
We'll call for the vote. Councillor Boulanger?
In favor?
Councillor Foster?
In favor.
Councillor Kinney?
In favor.
Councillor Watson?
In favor.
Councillor Wells?
In favor.
Mayor Byfolchi?
In favor?
The vote is 6 in favor and 0 opposed. The motion is carried.
Thank you, and we'll just take a 5-minute break to allow
Those are the reports from previous closed sessions.
It
We'll
is
pass on
moved
Tuesday
by
night.
Counselor, oh, is that
We
going
passed those
now?
on Tuesday night.
Okay, we're just gonna wrap up here. It's moved by Counselor Kinney, seconded by Counselor Wells. Resolved that Committee of the Whole received the update from legal counsel pertaining to a legal matter for information, and further that committee confirmed the direction provided to legal counsel on the legal matter.
Thank you, Worship. We'll call for the vote. Counselor Boulanger?
In favor?
Counselor Foster?
In favor?
Counselor Kinney?
In favor.
Counselor Watson?
In favor.
Counselor Wells?
In favor.
Mayor Byfolds in favor. The vote is 6 in favor and 0 opposed. The motion is carried.
And it's moved by Counselor Wells, seconded by Counselor Boulanger. Resolved that Committee of the Whole confirm the direction provided to the Senior Events Coordinator in closed session pertaining to an event update.
We'll call for the vote. Counselor Boulanger?
In favor?
Counselor Foster?
In favor?
Counselor Kinney?
In favor.
Counselor Watson?
In favor.
Counselor Wells?
In favor.
Mayor Byfolds.
In favor.
The vote is 6 in favor and 0 opposed. The motion is carried.
Thank you, and we are adjourned.